I'm titling this "TRAHAN'S of America," and I'm going to put it up on YouTube to the best of my very unprofessional ability. This is my ancestors. I started at the age of 7 in a quest to find out about my ancestors, particularly the Trahans, because at a very early age, 7 years old, my grandmother and my great-grandmother and the Trahans all laughed and said that I was a throwback to our Viking ancestors. Well, I'd already been in the library trying to researching history. I am not sure why this was such a quest, but I think it's because I grew up in a home of violence with parents that did not love me. And I just didn't feel connected to my society, and I really felt that it was important that I knew my history and my ancestors. My grandmother, Adrienne Trahan, was born in Colorado and then raised on a farm near Vernon and married Albert LaValle. And they were the only family, my grandparents, Adrienne and Albert, that ever showed me any real love and caring and compassion as a child. Raised by a violent, racist father, although he was really brilliant and a talented musician and singer, extremely talented. Most of his talents I did inherit, but lost because of my disease. And a mother that was not like her family. She was completely insane, and I won't go into that. My biography states very clearly what she did to me. There's no words to describe her. But at the age of 7, I fought our Catholic, racist, anti-Jewish nun. She strapped me for saying that Jesus Christ was Jewish, because I was annoyed at her attitude, hatred. I found it disgusting. Anyway, I fought back. And make a long story short, I won. I got a public apology from the Bishop of North Bay at our Sudbury, Ontario arena to the entire Catholic diocese. Every school attended. We're talking thousands. And a few are still alive that would remember it. And I got a public apology. And he said, yes, Jesus Christ was Jewish. Yes, Jesus Christ is Jewish. Got to remember that, people. Anyhow, everybody laughed, and my great-grandmother LaValle, she said I was a throwback to our Viking ancestors. Now, the LaValles and the Trahans had farms in this district of Vernon, Ontario, and they were all very loving and very close and very patriotic and human rights fighters. Yes. Yes. I had wonderful pictures of my uncle Arthur and Leo. Arthur was one of the first airplane pilots, but I lost them all when my brother stole our properties. But anyway, today I got a message from a distant relative cousin wanting to know if we might be related to her Aunt Victoria Trahan. And that set me on a quest that maybe by now Google had more information. And sure enough, they do. My ancestor is registered in Nova Scotia. So this is a little of my history that I have since found. I don't have any pictures, but there are so many of us that we are interconnected in our fight for rights. And but I went on. Adrian, to her death, was the only one and two cousins, Trahans, that encouraged me in my endeavors to fight for sane medical treatment for disease caused by being poisoned by mold and toxic chemicals, air, food, water, and get modern, proper gas mask equipment for all our workers in our factories, mines, military, and firemen. And although I have lost all the pictures of my Trahan cousins in both Canada and the United States, and original letters that Adrian wrote to our American cousins in New York, Florida, Louisiana, California, and California, where Colorado, where she California, yes, but and Colorado, little dyslexic there, where she was born. She kept in touch with everyone and even attended a reunion of the TRAHAN'S of America in Quebec in around 1980. But they have since disappeared. Why my ancestors were important to me is probably because I found so little human rights warriors in my society. And the fact that I was a direct descendant of warriors, fighters, who fought for the right to live in a clean, safe environment, gave me hope that someday we would win this war. I just lost a page here. Give me a minute. Okay, I'm going to cut off here and I'm going to post this page and then I'll speak about it. Oh, jeez. This will be the second time I did this, but anyway, I found a map of where he was from, and I'm going to post that. I have trouble saying it. Montreal, Belley, France. And Gilliam Trahan, there are 3 spellings of his name, and I'm going to include a little picture of that I found on Google. There is a site in a village called Village of Trahan. He was a skilled tradesman, skilled in both English and French, reading and writing, well educated. He became the head of the clan, and a village was named after him. He was a very prominent citizen. And thanks to the indigenous native people at the time, there's a record that they helped the immigrants from France, including the Trahans. And they survived the wilderness and farming in the wilderness thanks to the native Indians. And that's on record in Nova Scotia. And that was right up until 1775, when genocide took place. The British tried to annihilate the French, and they fled into the United States. And my grandmother, through the group called TRAHAN'S of America, that since disappeared, as I mentioned earlier, she kept in touch with Trahan relatives and cousins from New York, Florida, where she was born, Colorado, California, Louisiana, and Quebec. Her father's section of the clan fed to Quebec, not to the United States. I'll tell that story later, how they wound up in the United States 400 years later. But he was a very prominent citizen until and they lived a really good life in Nova Scotia, thanks to the natives. And I'm going to post that. Okay. Well, I did it again, but I deleted my video. I have to do it over again. Okay. This is about the 1775 deportation, which frankly was genocide against the French by the British. And they forced the French settlers out of Acadia by the brutal British Colonel Winslow, who burned down all their villages. And many fled to the United States, which I knew from my grandmother Adrian, as somehow she had kept in touch with many of our ancestral relatives to the age of 90. And they were all over the United States, but mainly New York, Florida, Louisiana, California, and her home state of Colorado. And my Trahan clan fled to Quebec, and so did the Lavalleys. And they wound up in Ontario because of the Quebec laws. And my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandmother Adrian's father, he fled to Colorado because the taxes that still exist to this day, that was developed by the British to put the small farmers out of business, he left Quebec for Colorado in around 1880. And my grandmother was born in 1894 in Colorado. But in early 1900s, the Ontario government, desperately trying to open up the north, offered free land to the farmers, knowing that there were plenty of French in the United States that would come back, and they did. And the Lavalleys and the Trahans all created farms in northern Ontario in the location of Verner, Ontario. In fact, that's where I was born, on the farm. My mother went back to have me there. Eventually she married Albert, and they had 16 children and a wonderful, loving, happy marriage. And unfortunately, he died too soon. She was left a widow, quite young. We won't go into that. But I am so happy that Google has registered this information, and I will follow this video with some of the evidence that of this deportation is on record. And Diane LaValle, one cousin, has some pictures, but she hasn't published them. And I wish she'd send them back to me, because I would. But anyway, even though I don't have those lovely pictures 100 years old, I do have a baby picture of me that clearly resembles my beloved grandmother. And I'm going to follow that up with the proof and the history on the deportation. I am going to enclose some pictures that are going to follow this of my LaValle and Trahans. On my computer, I have one picture, a collage that I made for my mother, of my grandmother's baby picture, 1894. I had her original large 8 by 10 picture. Oh, breaks my heart I lost all that, but anyway. And on the right, you can't even see it, but I had a picture of her parents on their farm near Verner. And they were, I have to say, the Lavallys and the Trahans followed their ancestral tradition 400 years later, reading, writing, French and English, well-educated, fluently bilingual. All 16 children that my Albert and Adrian had. Yes, I was the only one because my mother married a racist pig. But I am truly grateful to have inherited the warrior spirit of my fighting Viking ancestors, and no doubt my connection to those early natives, indigenous native Indians in Canada, who helped my ancestors survive in the Harz Wilderness in 1636. And I thank you to all natives, for none of us would be here without you. Okay. At a very early age, I vividly remember, age of 7, when I got that strap saying Jesus Christ was Jewish. I did not relate well to anyone, no one in my family, religion, or local society. But I did feel a kindred spirit to our indigenous native people who prayed to the creator of the universe, which made sense to me. And living off the land, which I also believed was truly wonderful. I loved to fish at the local river by my grandparents, Trahan and Lavalley Farm, owned by my uncle Arthur Trahan. My grandmother had pictures of him, and he was one of the first airplane pilots in World War I and a true hero. And so was his brother. And later in a family group, he was really handsome. And I would go to my grandmother's with my my mother's youngest sisters, Lorraine and Carmen, and they'd clean up his mess as he was sick in bed, dying slowly with alcoholism. And he was very kind to me. I don't know what happened after the war, but something happened, and he never fully recovered. And he inherited the Trahan, my great-grandparents' farm, and he let it fall to rack and ruin. And my grandfather, Albert, and Adrian, grandmother, all tried to help him, but to no avail. He was a lost cause. But he liked me, and he had 100-year-old newspapers. Well, me who loved history, I would spend an hour reading those newspapers. And he just liked having me there, and I was so happy when I would visit him. It's too bad that I completely lost all memory and touch of what happened. And the fashions, of course. But I do remember asking my great-grandmother LaValle if I had any native in me, and she replied in a language I, of course, did not understand, but because it was very ancient French. She was a LaValle. She was not educated in English. Only the Trahans were completely bilingual. And anyway, she said that that it was quite possible, because as long as they would become Catholic, they were not prejudiced. They would marry a native person. And I kind of always like to keep that and pretend that, yes, it had to be true. In fact, I think they were Eskimos, because I love the cold and I love the snow and I hate summer. So they were probably Eskimos. But anyway, I did so love being on the farm, and I secretly had a great desire that a French farmer would fall in love with me, rescue me, and I would have a dozen children that I would adopt from families that did not love them. Yeah, that was my little dream, as I knew I was not loved by my parents. What love I got, I received later in all through my life, from strangers, native people, and neighbors, and people from all cultures, from all over the world, later in life. But of course, my grandparents and my Trahan cousins. It is in their honor I took the name Trahan in my quest for rights to for sane medical treatment for chemical poisoning, and to stop poisoning our forests, our lands, our rivers, our lakes, and humanity at large. And I will end it with my last picture. When I was born and when I began my fight for rights. Over and out. Well, if there are any Trahan relatives, ancestors out there, just a little hi from me to you. Proud of my heritage.